Actually, so I'm going to talk about this game, Football Drama, which is actually in the hall. You can go and try it. It's also mobile on PC. And actually, so I'm going to talk about how this game came to be. I've never been a great football fan. And actually, at the time, I was studying writing. And so I had a friend studying, we were both studying writing, and I discovered by chance that he had this great knowledge and passion for football, and I said, oh, bizarre. And so, I mean, there was a small crack in my prejudice, and so I started taking notice of this, and so I found out that this is like a pandemic among writing students, this passion for football. And so then I wonder, well, maybe it's not just the students who write, maybe writers are interested in football. And so I discovered that this is actually a real pandemic. And so there is this, I found out that there's this beautiful literature about football. Football as, so not just literature in the sense of novels, but also poetry, and from authors like, which I already knew for other works, and so this was puzzling me, and also in other media, in movies and movies about football, the poetry of football, the romance of football, and also studies like sociology, the economy of football, and the role of football in society. So, summing up, one of my beloved authors, of course, maybe an anthropologist, Roland Barthes, and an anthropologist, non-standard one, of course, as you may know. He, because of his interest seeing, not like studying remote societies, but everyday modern contemporary society as a field of interesting anthropological studies. Of course, as we know, anthropology no longer exists in that sense, in that form, but he was different. He was different. And his studies on sport as ritual and so on, somehow gave me a framework for building this game. And so as I was encouraged in building a narrative game on football by the fact of seeing so many examples of games using narrative. I mean, it's somehow small games using narrative as an effective means for storytelling. Not only the fact of using narrative, but the fact that they were innovating the way they were using narrative in some unique forms. And so I started writing, and the writing process for football itself was very interesting because, of course, not only because of the lingo, of course, also I discovered that every nation has a specific language that is used for football. And in English, for example, there are many expressions of the language that are somehow not used anymore in the common everyday language. They use exclusively for football. Not only, also very old expression, also of course new expressions. And so I formed. This is because of my style, fragmentary style of writing. I sort of meshed this language with Nadsat. So influences of the Clockwork Orange, sort of Russian invented language, because of course I wanted to have also the fact of the Premier League, of the presence of the Russian money and all this kind of stuff and intrigue into the game. And also, of course, I put the Book of Changes, because why not, in the language. And I had my own version of the book, and which of course drove crazy the Chinese translation when she had to translate back to Chinese, because as she told me that today's Chinese don't even understand the Chinese of the Book of Changes. Anyway, so this was really interesting, fascinating work, and so and also with my friend Daniele Giardini, who was the author of the cards illustration, we wanted to work on the games dialogues, because we were unhappy how usually in games dialogues are represented. There's a lot of focus on illustration and the quality of graphic design and of animations and things like this, but the dialogues, UI, the user interface of dialogue usually is not that interesting. So And there are other fields where it's much more mature, the work that is done, in particular, of course, in comics. In comics, there's this amazing level of relationship between typography and graphic design, which is not so common in games. So we created somehow we studied the thing. And of course, you can find on Gamma Sutra some posts where we detail the work that we done. And you can actually also find recent posts with the stuff I'm telling you today in an extremely excruciatingly long and detailed form. And okay, so another aspect which I want us to somehow represent in the game, like in this, so I saw the game a bit as a sort of anthropological study of the field. And of course, football is, anthropologically seen, is a representation of war, okay? It's a way of having war in a ritual form. And this is testified not only by the rules and the way the game is played, but even by the language. If you study statistically the game, the language that is used in football is the same, is the language of war, okay? But of course, this is done in a way, it's a sort of ritual that we feel, and it somehow explain why people are so interested in it, no? Because it's something which is deep in us, is a way to dispel the need of war somehow, at least in some interpretation. But another dimension we wanted to have in the game is the humor, because of course this representation and the tension, anybody who knows about football supporters knows how much humor plays a big role in the relationship, in a healthy relationship with the game. So I studied the language of the supporters, the chants, and so on, and many things. And all these are somehow represented and quoted in the game and in the narrative. And they help somehow creating an atmosphere, of course, using minimal means, because this was a really small, independent production. Basically, the game is being developed by 2 guys working part-time on it. Another very interesting factor is the representation of time in game, because we wanted to have a narrative with choices, and that means a branching narrative, so different things can happen, you can take different paths, and at the same time you have a championship. And this is a problem wherever you're doing, if you want to do a narrative game on whichever sport where there is a championship, you will have this big problem, because championships, they have a fixed rhythm, okay? So, and things happen with this loop, which is weekly loop. And of course, if you have this weekly loop and then you have a branching narrative, you will never know, and this is really a sort of game designer's problem, which situation will match with week when it's happening, what is happening, and you can have, obviously you can quickly have a combinatorial explosion there, okay? So this is one problem. Another problem is somehow how to get the team, your team state and players state, somehow, how can it work together with the life choices that your characters are making? And there again, you have a big problem there, a modeling problem. And what's a classic game designer trick there is to use cards. Okay, cards simplify combinatorial spaces. And so what we did the some life choices, generate special cards, which are like the cards we've seen in the slide before, which you can use in circumstances to change some dimensions of the team, and so somehow this flows together. It's not perfect, but it somehow works. And we made it compatible with 24 different endings, and that was basically it. Then another problem we had, which was the fact that I wanted to somehow represent, have real matches played in the game, not just somehow, not the story of the game, but actually play the games. And I wanted to use the cards, but I didn't want to play football games with cards. Usually, there have been many attempts, and they're usually extremely mechanically painful games. They're very slow, and somehow they lose the rhythm. Football sports have a rhythm. So I compromised the 2 things where you have always these binary choices during the game, and you can play really quickly, but it's turn-based, but turns last only a few seconds. Okay, so there's a quick rhythm there, and somehow how do you feel the game? Well, there's a strong projection. Actually, I've seen it work, particularly on mobile for the game, where we sold most of the game. Because I use all these tools, I have a detailed log of the game. I have this quick action. I have lots of effects. And then when the action becomes crucial, like you can score or not score, I have created this little emulator, which I may go into it if I have 2 more minutes. Anyway, so I use all this and mixing with the cards, the effects in play. So this is how I created this effect of a match. And so I don't have an answer to the question of why people are so passionate about football, but still I did find through the studies and this representation that football does talk about some deep needs and problems of our society, and this rich representation touches some important deep topics of our society and the human beings. And Pasolini, who, if you think about him, which is present in the game, if you think about him, he was using, I heard, the transmedia. He was using poetry, writing, movies, and he had, differently from when I started, he had this approach where he saw dignity in low aspects of culture. So like he was extremely interested in football played in many forms. He even had a beautiful rewriting grammar. He did a sort of rewriting grammar for generating football matches. Of course, he wasn't a programmer, but that's a tool that he had as a linguist. And doing a football emulator is a gigantic task. It's something really hard. So how did I do the scenes, the action scenes? I did that by scripting the preparation of the match, and then giving AI to the players, but AI only in this restricted predefined situation. So that's a trick if for an indie game if you want to go full and do a full simulation of a game with the tactics in particular, the tactics will make it almost impossible to solve it as a lone developer, because the kind of the space is too wide. But if you do half scripted and half AI, this is something feasible. And so if you're doing hockey or American football, I think, or basketball, you could do it this way. It was an interesting way to get out of this trap, which I found myself. In fact, I thought, oh, well, of course, football will have loads of plugins ready in Unity. And of course, there's none because of this kind of problem. So, okay.